Hey everyone, how are you? Just do some temperature check with everyone. How's everyone doing? Can see Ashley's here, Emily. Okay, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me clearly? Okay, awesome. Perfect. All right. Today is not the best weather in this fall. I think it's the first raining day, I think, in the past a few weeks, but it's good. It's not too bad. Is everyone doing all right? There's a lot of flus going on right now in COVID. I hope everyone is doing okay in this season. There's some flu shots coming if everyone wants to get it. It's a good choice. Um, all right, we're just gonna wait for a few more minutes. So we have 8 attendees. I think we have 22 registered today. Just wait a little more time. Great. And just to let everyone know, this session is recorded, and you're welcome to open your webcam anytime. And if you have any questions for our speakers today, you can raise your hand and the speaker can answer your questions anytime. Perfect. We have 10 attendees right now. Okay. How about let's use this time to introduce ourselves. Um, who are you? What do you do? I think that would be awesome. Okay, I'll start with myself. My name is Will Yan. I'm from the Chamber, and I'm the community engagement specialist. I started here a month ago, so pretty new. Pretty excited right now. And that's that's what I am, who I am, and what I do. And let's pass to our attendees today and just introduce yourself. Who want to start first? Yeah, I think their chat is disabled. Okay, awesome. Okay, thanks, Emily. We're gonna solve my colleague Naja gonna solve the problem. I'm mm. All right. So we just see, it's 7 after 10. I think let's just start right now, and people are gonna keep coming in. So first, welcome to the webinar. Good morning. So this today's session is Business Support Series webinar, and thank you all for joining us. As I mentioned, my name is Will, and I'm a host today. So we're here today to learn about the laws and regulations on occupational health and safety in Nova Scotia. Health and safety is an essential part of any business operations. It's not only important for reducing risk, but also for protecting employee well-being, both physically and mentally while they are on their job. So thank you again, everybody who submitted the questions for our presenter. Today we got the Q&A, and also feel free to type any other questions into the chat box. And our presenter and guest speaker today is Sterling Kendall. Welcome, Sterling, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Will. I appreciate the introduction. So first of all, thank you for the Chamber of Commerce for hosting this event, and thank you all for signing up for what is one of three webinars on the topic of occupational health and safety. So just as a quick introduction, as Will mentioned, my name is Sterling Kendall. I am one of two safety advisors with the Occupational Health and Safety Division, which is part of the Department of Labor, Skills and Immigration. This role was created only less than 2 years ago. It was sort of the result of COVID and a lot of the struggles and gaps that small businesses experienced in terms of kind of complying with public health orders and then getting information around occupational health and safety. But previous to that, I've also served in different roles. I've been with the department since 2010. During my time here, I've worked in the corporate policy and services aspect of occupational health and safety. I've also spent a long time as a occupational health and safety investigator, in which I would be responsible for responding to investigating different workplace accidents and up to including fatalities, and if the situation warrants, laying charges in those situations. So I do have about 13 years of experience here with the department, and today I'm going to be speaking to you about the occupational health and safety laws here in Nova Scotia. And so I think my next slide here will kind of just sort of discuss our objectives of what we're hoping to accomplish today. I realize I have about 1 hour to cover a fairly large topic, and as Will mentioned, I'm definitely I'd love to hear your questions if you have them. I will set aside a period of time at the end of the presentation to answer any questions you may have. But if you see something that you'd like to discuss at that point in time, please don't hesitate to share it in the comments, and I think we'll facilitate that. So today there are three main objectives that we have for this session. The big part is to sort of, as small business operators and owners, just to sort of explain what the laws and regulations are around occupational health and safety here in Nova Scotia, and which ones apply to different businesses. But also, it's important that as operators and as workplace parties, that you understand the health and safety requirements and the responsibilities for business operators. So there is a system that we'll be discussing today around that sort of regulates and structures how health and safety is to be operated and done. And it's important that everybody in the workplace sort of understands how that applies to them and what their roles and responsibilities are. So not just understanding the laws and where to find them, but also sort of how that plays in and what your responsibilities are as whether it's an employer, business owner, supervisor, or employee. So just overall the overall framework. And the last part is, we want to definitely go over some of the free occupational health and safety resources that we here with the Department of Labor have available to the public, and also, importantly to small business operators, so that if you have, if you're looking for resources, that you understand where to access them, whether it's, documents or manuals around developing a safety management framework, but also accessing online training, as well as information that you can supply to your employees as part of an orientation, or if they have any questions as well. So those are the three main aspects that we're going to be covering here today. So first of all, I think it's important to sort of touch a little bit on, who we are and, what exactly our function is as part of, this overall occupational health and safety system here in Nova Scotia. So our Department of Labor Skills and Immigration is one of 19 government departments. We have quite a wide array in terms of services that we provide, but also how we sort of regulate different aspects of the workplaces and business here in Nova Scotia. The department itself is broken down into 6 main components. We have skills and learning, labor services that would include employment standards. We have the immigration part, which is a huge aspect of our portfolio. We have corporate policy and services, which is sort of more of an internal support aspect for the department itself, as well as the engagement, equity, and diversity aspect, which again supports the internal part of the department. The one function I haven't mentioned yet, which is ours, is the Occupational Health and Safety Division. And within this division, so our role is to provide assistance and to provide and to sort of administer the regulations around workplace health and safety, but also that includes we work as well with technical safety. And technical safety, they would deal with anything from fuel inspections to power engineers, boiler pressure equipment, elevators and lifts, and cranes. So that's more the technical engineering aspect in terms of the workplaces and the construction aspects. But any one of those elements, boilers and pressure equipment, could be involved in a small business as well. So just so that you understand that we are co-located with them, that we have close relationships with them as well. So they, in terms of their role to inspect and to regulate those aspects. The actual Occupational Health and Safety safety division, in addition to technical services, also includes the safety division, and that's you'll see over here made up of this purple aspect. So the safety division itself is broken into three main parts. The main part here is the inspection compliance group. This would be made up of the 50 or so safety officers and investigators, which are dispersed across the entire province of Nova Scotia by different region, and they would be responsible for not only answering questions or responding to calls around health and safety in the workplace, but also administering the act. We have the technical services division here, which is made up of sort of our industrial specialists. So we have electrical engineers, we have mining engineers, as well as occupational hygienists, and they would sort of be responsible for managing or to assisting with respect to more technical aspects of workplace health and safety. But we could be dealing with, like, mining engineers is very specific to mining industry, but also air quality when it comes to occupational hygienists. And the last group here, for which my colleague and I belong, is awareness and outreach. And this is the aspect of the division that sort of deals with public education, but also sort of bringing resources to the public to make you aware of what's available out there for you in terms of whether it's a small business operator or an employee, and how you can receive assistance from the division if you have any questions. So the overall role of our safety division is also outlined very clearly in the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and it sort of explains to the public and to Nova Scotia as a whole sort of, you know, what it is that we bring to Nova Scotians. Obviously a big role is to sort of improve the understanding of health and safety requirements through education, such as we're doing here today, and as we'll get into in quite a bit of depth a bit later on, sort of explaining and trying to help support the operation of the internal responsibility system. Like I mentioned before, we have a big component that administers the occupational health and safety legislation, and this is through our provincial safety officers that are able to go into businesses. They have powers under legislation to go into businesses at any given time to help administer the act and to answer any questions as well. A big part also is, we have a 1-800 campaign, which sort of invites people, the public, regardless of whether you're an employer, an employee, or a supplier, or a constructor, to contact us if you have any questions in terms of your compliance. And finally, to sort of continuously improve health and safety conditions in the province, whether that's through research, ongoing research, tackling various new and emerging issues in health and safety, and making sure that these are applicable to Nova Scotians and that they have the best regulation and framework in place for them. But this is also done through inspections, whether it can be a response to a complaint about a business, either from a member of the public saying, I've seen a business that I feel unsafe, we'd appreciate if an officer went in, or it can be internally, perhaps an employee exercising their right and contacting an officer as well. Also through investigations and enforcement. So seeing, if there are trends in the industry in terms of injury, where those are, and what we can do as a division to support businesses to make sure that they're minimizing and eliminating those risks. So this next slide is what we call our pathways to compliance, and it's helpful, just based on the membership here today being, a lot of small business operators, that you also understand sort of that this is our internal framework, and this pathways to compliance was, this is how the division sort of administers and deals with the public and businesses in terms of, administering the different pieces of legislation and regulations. So sort of it's, it's deemed a pathway to compliance. So the idea is that it's sort of a progressive measure in terms of the contact and how they approach businesses. So the early part will be, setting the legislative and policy work. So how, making sure that the legislation and the regulations sort of can be used by industry, that they reflect the needs of industry. And this is done, through public consultations as well. So whenever they have regulatory reviews, they'll make sure that they consult the public so everybody has a say and to see that their business needs are reflected in future changes to the regulations. The next aspect to that will be sort of promoting compliance to various workplace parties, and this can be through the way of presentations to employers, but also through our publications and our online content. We'll be discussing that as well, sort of how some of the information that we push out to industry, and sort of to make them aware of various changes to regulations, or changes in terms of trends that we're seeing develop around different aspects or potential injuries. And then the next sort of level up would be verifying So this would be ensuring that businesses are actually, complying with the requirements of the regulations in the Act. And this can be done either, like I said, on an ad hoc event where an officer has the power to enter premises and to say, I feel that this may, I have reason, not even, they don't even need a reason to believe. It's just sort of, they may choose today to inspect a construction site, and tomorrow it might be a member of a fishing sector. So, they have that authority to sort of inspect wherever they see fit, but it can also, like I said before, it can be responsive to a concern by the public or an internal member of that workplace. And, if there's an incident as well, every workplace has that obligation to conduct an internal investigation, but given certain situations, they also can investigate. And sort of the highest and last aspect on this continuum is the enforcement part. And this is sort of where for whatever reason, either is due to the nature of the event where it has resulted in significant injury or accident or loss of life, or perhaps there are certain employers that are simply unwilling to make the necessary changes to fall in line with the Act and regulations, then the officers do have the power under the Act to lay certain charges, either under short form prosecution or long form prosecution, summary offense tickets, but also administrative penalties, which are part of the compliance order. So this would sort of be deemed the last and highest level of enforcement. And the intent, really, I think most of the work is done sort of in these first three phases, and this is essentially for the most part reserved to recidivist employers, or some of the more difficult situations where the force of law is necessary to ensure compliance and to protect life. So this next slide, I thought would be sort of helpful to sort of understand where we fit in terms of the overall Nova Scotia labor market. The Halifax Chamber of Commerce, this is judging from my online research, counts approximately 1,900 business members with over 84,000 employees. And from the website, I see that 83% of the membership are made up of small businesses, which are 25 businesses or less. And this is a perfect reflection of sort of how businesses operated here in Nova Scotia, because across all of Nova Scotia, there are approximately 30,000 small and medium-sized businesses, which represent 92% of all businesses out there. So, it's important to acknowledge that, the where most businesses have less than 25 employees, the risk among those small businesses may be somewhat different than the larger employers that may have access to internal safety resources and safety officers and some more professional assistance in helping them comply with the regulations. So, that's an important part of the awareness and outreach components of the division in terms of reaching these smaller employers and helping and supporting them and providing them with the whether it's the information, the guidance, or the resources to help them comply with the regulations while at the same time operating their business. So this is just a quick snapshot of Nova Scotia's labor market in August of this year. The total labor force of Nova Scotia, this is the population of 15 years and older who during the reference week itself were either employed or unemployed. So essentially people of the able to work. So we counted approximately 530,000 members of the workforce across Nova Scotia. In terms of the actual employment number, that was around 491,000, and as you can see, a significant number of those being employed full time at 405,000. This is across all of Nova Scotia. And here in Halifax, this is I should specify this is in 2022. The labor force here in Halifax counted approximately 265,000 people and had a participation rate of about 67%. So I think it's, again, this is sort of me extrapolating these numbers. I don't think this isn't grounded anywhere in statistics, but approximately I think one in three people in Nova Scotia would be employed in and around the Halifax regional municipality. And we're seeing a definite rise in the employment level here in HRM. In 2022, that was approximately 4.8%. And this is very important because as part of some of the work that we're doing, we do engage a lot with whether it's small businesses, but also with a lot of newcomers and immigrants to Nova Scotia, whether it's from other provinces, but also or from other countries as well, in helping promote and support their understanding of the health and safety structure here in Nova Scotia, because it can often be very difficult. So we want to ensure that everybody is aware of what that looks like and are comfortable sort of speaking up to their employer and coming to us if they have any questions that their employer might not be in a position to answer. So this next slide, we'll talk about a very important issue, which is sort of who has jurisdiction over occupational health and safety in Canada. And it's sort of an interesting component. Interesting situation because as you all know, Nova Scotia has both a federal, sorry, Canada has both a federal government, and every province sort of has their own internal, their own provincial government, and they are responsible for different aspects of governance, and they're responsible for different topics as well. So all of this essentially takes form or is sort of outlined in the Constitution Act, and the Constitution Act, will sort of outline who has jurisdiction and responsibility for enforcing or for taking care of different aspects. And it's a situation where they outline very clearly what's under the responsibility of the federal government, and sort of by default, everything that is is under the control of the individual jurisdiction. So it's helpful to sort of go through this list very quickly and sort of explain what is by automatically would fall under federal jurisdiction. And the biggest first one would be the federal civil service. This includes federal prisons, not provincial prisons. The federal crown agencies, Canada Post being the classic example of that. Banks, federally regulated banks. Now this is to the exclusion of trust companies and credit unions, which fall under provincial jurisdiction. Railways, but again, this is not if the provincial crown owns it. Shipping and harbors would all be federal jurisdiction. Telecommunications, Bell or anything cable, optic, satellite is all federal. Canals, cross borders work such as bridges. Airlines and airports, again, we'd have no jurisdiction over. The RCMP, grain elevators, ferries, trucking, where it's cross-border, bus lines, again, anything that is interprovincial, so trucking, bus lines, courier services, pipelines, by default is federal. The military, radio, native lands, uranium mines and nuclear safety, so specifically uranium, nuclear safety, and exploration and drilling oil and gas on federal lands. Would all of this is by default under the federal jurisdiction. And this is important because there are occasionally businesses that may have a significant component here in a province, but may operate or have retail in other aspects. So determining whether they fall under our jurisdiction is sort of the first point of contact that an officer would have to make in making that determination. So the rest over here is sort of defaults automatically to the province. And this is manufacturing and industrial, retail, so shops, mining. Obviously, the only one is to the exclusion of uranium, and I think the rationale for that is because it sort of constitutes an important part of the overall operation of Canada. It is also, I believe, a military threat as well, so that falls under federal jurisdiction. But mining, whether it's gypsum, coal, anything else, would fall under, if it's in the province, they have jurisdiction over that. Forestry, municipalities, each one being individual, but overall they must comply with our provincial regulations. Non-federal governments, such as ourselves, the province, as an employee of the province, I'm still falling under the Health and Safety Act. Schools and universities, hospitals, construction, and office work, which is obviously to the exclusion of any federal offices. So that sort of provides an overall, overview of who regulates, depending on the nature of the business, whether the federal government under the Canada Labor Codes would have jurisdiction, or whether they would fall under the Occupational Health and Safety Act here in Nova Scotia. So before I get into sort of the act and regulations, I just wanted to sort of talk a little bit about the history, and where it began, or sort of here in Nova Scotia, what sort of prompted the passage of the legislation that we currently see here today. And unfortunately, and Nova Scotia has a very sad history in terms of the genesis of the act, which is not. I think the occupational health and safety legislation existed in other jurisdictions before the West Ray mining disaster, but here in Nova Scotia, certainly that was the impetus for passing this legislation. And I'm sure many, if not all of you, are familiar with the horrific event that took place in Plymouth, Nova Scotia, in which a coal mine, there was an explosion that took place in the morning of May 9th, 1992, and it killed 26 coal miners. It was the result of a buildup of methane gas as well as coal dust. And it was this horrible accident was the second largest one. I think there was a previous one in the 1950s that also killed approximately 70 miners here in Nova Scotia, up in Spring Hill. But this was sort of the second terrible disaster, and it was all over the news. It received received international acclaim, and attention, I should say, just because it was a devastating situation. And of the 26 coal miners that were killed, they were, despite immediate recovery efforts, they were only able to actually physically recover 15 bodies, and 11, the other remaining, were sort of left entombed. They were simply unable to be recovered. The youngest of the victims was 22 years old, and the oldest was 56. And 4 years later, they passed the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And the important aspect, one of many reasons why it was passed, was to ensure that employees had a much stronger voice regarding safety in their workplace. And as a result of this tragedy, there was a judicial committee that reviewed sort of the situation. A commission, I believe, that reviewed the situation, and it was found that on several occasions, employees had actually spoken up and had actually voiced their concerns to actually their respective MLAs, but also in the workplace itself. And there was one situation in particular where the employer raised these concerns to the supervisor in terms of how they were proceeding and how they were actually operating the mine, which was contrary to the regulations, but also imposed a risk on the miners, and that person was fired. So because they didn't have the protections at the time that that were passed later on, it was a common situation where if you spoke up, that you are at risk of being fired or terminated, and that is not, that's obviously not something that's acceptable. And the laws were passed to sort of make changes to ensure that employees saw themselves reflected in their workplace and were actually empowered to speak up when the situation called for it. So in 1996, when they passed the Nova Scotia Occupational Health and Safety Act, these were three of the main points that were sort of made, and that we should remember. One is that as we outlined previously in terms of who has jurisdiction, any employer that falls under provincial jurisdiction is automatically regulated or falls under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. It's not something that you can contract out or decide that you would no longer participate, or you wish to fall under the federal one. If it's found to be under provincial jurisdiction, that it will apply to you. And as we'll see in the next slide, it does provide the basis for regulations to regulate different aspects of the industry. So the Act itself is more about the people. It's more about the rights and responsibilities of the various workplace parties. So all the way sort of from the owner to the operator to the supplier to the supervisor to the worker to the engineer or architect. Everybody that's sort of part and parcel to a workplace has different rights and responsibilities under the Act. And it also outlines the powers and responsibilities of the Health and Safety Division, the various officers, in terms of what they can do for compliance reasons. But then it also sort of will provide a framework, which we'll talk a little bit more to sort of ensure that workers have a voice and various rights and responsibilities, but also can access information around their safety needs when they need to do so. And the last point I'd like to make in this slide is that the Act itself establishes mandatory minimum standards for health and safety in the workplace. And that was a big issue previous to the passage of the Act, was that no two workplaces were necessarily the same. And there were existing regulations, but the overall consistency across the industry was not guaranteed. So the idea is to sort of establish a minimum level of safety that every worker and workplace has to abide by, and that's something that cannot change regardless. You cannot forfeit it. You cannot contract that away. That every employee should be secure in the knowledge that whether they're working in Yarmouth or in Sydney, that the standards will apply to them equally, and their employer must comply with it, in the same way. So as we mentioned, the Act itself, so the Act is more about the people and establishing their rights and responsibilities in the workplace. But as we all know, no two businesses are the same, and we have a multitude of different industries and industries across the province, anything from manufacture to retail to forestry. So they needed to develop some more specific regulations that would sort of get into the actual details of that particular type of work, and would outline sort of what the requirements are, are, whether you're conducting forestry operations or underground mining. Underground mining being a classic example where it's such a huge operation, and the level of risks, there are significant risks when working underground, where one failure or one oversight can have disastrous consequences. So they have a regulation, which is the underground mining regulations, that will deal specifically with that type of industry, and they're very detailed, they're very outlined, and they'll establish exactly all of the parameters and controls that need to be put in place to protect employees when working in that industry. So this is a quick overview of the regulations that are issued under Section 82 of the Health and Safety Act, which says that the Minister and Council can issue regulations. So these are the ones that would most typically apply to businesses, starting with the Occupational Safety and General Regulations. This would deal with primarily with aspects of personal protective equipment, hoists, confined spaces. There's quite a variety of it. And then what's happening now is we have a new regulations called the Workplace Health and Safety Regulation, which currently will include regulations around administrative penalties. So these would be situations where, if an officer issues a compliance orders, and given in certain situation where there is a potential for risk, they can issue the penalty, which is a financial penalty. But these regulations will also talk about first aid, what first aid requirements are, who they apply to, and what they are, depending on where your business operations are. There'll also be there's an extensive part on scaffold and other elevated work platforms, which again is a big aspect of small businesses. And we'll also deal with temporary workplaces on highways. The idea is that over time, and we don't have a specific framework in mind quite yet, but over time, all of these various regulations will be migrated into this one workplace health and safety regulation. So there'll only be a need to reference to the Act and this workplace health and safety regulation, which we sometimes refer to as the WHISRs for short. The next regulations that you'll commonly come into contact with are the WHMIS, which is the Workplace Hazardous Material Information System. And this will talk about, the use of controlled substances in your workplace, anything, whether it's poisonous or potentially toxic. If it's a type of chemical that you're using in your workplace, it'll outline, what the responsibilities are around training, around labeling, and also ensuring that employees have access to safety data sheets so they can see exactly what is made up in that material and how to best protect themselves. If they have any questions in terms of allergies or what have you, they should be able to access those safety data sheets and get that information. The violence in the workplace, for a lot of small businesses, this would apply to them. There is a list of qualifying operations and businesses that based on the nature of your work. The ones that come to mind, I think, is healthcare, taxis, retail. So certain situations where it's either by the nature of the work, perhaps by the public that you're dealing with, or if you're dealing with money or certain situations at working alone, there's a greater risk, than the violence in the workplace regulations would apply to you, and you have to comply with what's required set out there. So the smoke-free workplace, I believe we're all very familiar with that in terms of smoking in and around the workplace. Disclosure of information regulation, it deals more with like industrial classification. So if certain chemicals, if an employee is hurt by exposure to a chemical, then a doctor has the right to find out, the nature of the chemical or what was put in that compound. Underground mining, as we outlined, sort of deals with underground mining operation, occupational diving as well, and blasting safety, again, is very specific because, it deals with significant energy displacement. So, it's very clear as to how the blasting operations are to be outlined. The next part, now we've reviewed the Health and Safety Act and the regulations, but these next few slides also talk about some of the other legislation that will impact a small business, or any business for that matter. And codes and standards, just as a quick outline, in our regulations, you will often see reference to various CSA standards or other standards, but you'll also see reference to building codes and electrical codes. So, for anybody who may not be familiar with what standards are compared to regulations, standards are, they're sort of a set of specific, a framework, a very specific framework, which are developed by expert committees of members with technical knowledge and competencies. So for example, our regulations will often reference the CSA standards, the Canadian Standards Associations. These various committees are made up of engineers, hygienists, different experts in that area. They all serve the same common goal, which is to establish a sort of a minimum standard or the optimal safety standard for that particular aspect. I think the first standard that was developed was around the railroads. But now we'll see anything from hockey helmets to a personal protective equipment. And the idea being that, you know, when you see that particular standard on the piece of material or in that particular process, then you know that it's in compliance with the standard set out by a group of experts knowledgeable in that particular topic. So oftentimes our regulations will adopt that standard rather than outlining exactly what that looks like. It's easier to reference that standard. And a big reason as well is that these standards, these committees, the volunteer members who meet on the Canadian Standards Associations, they meet regularly to constantly review the various standards for which they're responsible and where necessary to update them. So across Canada, you'll be able to be guided by one specific standard and understand that it's the most current, it's the most up to date. So that's another big advantage of incorporating standards. So if you see that in the regulations, you'll understand now that that's the reason why they're there. Similarly with building codes and electrical codes, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with those can be quite lengthy and very detailed. So rather than sort of duplicating all of the wording there, they just reference those codes so the person can go to the most recent version of the codes and follow the requirements there. The next slide will talk about the criminal code aspect and how that, you know, potentially can impact businesses. You know, it's helpful to mention because it is a reality. It's, you know, fortunately it's not something that comes up very often because it does, like I said, have a very sad history. And the reason it was created, so essentially it's called the Westray Bill. It was passed in 2003, and initially was labeled Bill C-45. And what it does is it sort of amends the criminal code, section 217.1 of the criminal code, and establishes specific legal duties for workplace parties. So prior to the disaster at Westray, it was, you know, when a business was incorporated, you know, it's the reason that business is incorporated is also to eliminate and reduce liability. But there was a shielding of the operating mines for the actions done by the company. So, you know, if it was deemed that, you know, I didn't necessarily commit this criminal activity, it was, you know, my company did it. But, you know, the Bill C-45 sort of allows the prosecution to sort of lift that corporate veil and to hold the directing minds of the company responsible for the criminal actions done by the company. So I think it's also important to mention that this is really a situation reserved for the worst case scenarios. We're speaking of gross criminal negligence, such as what we saw in the Westray situation, where, you know, the operators of the mine had been warned repeatedly. A lot of these issues were brought to their attention. There were refusals brought forward by the workers. All of this was continuously avoided, ignored, or negated, and, you know, ultimately resulted in a massive loss of life. So again, this is the worst. This would be, I guess, gross criminal negligence, I think, would probably be the best way of explaining it. But it's important to mention that it's still a factor. It's you know, it's an aspect of the criminal code, but does apply within the occupational health and safety framework. The last piece, and this is sort of the last level in terms of, you know, how health and safety legislation applies in your workplace, are the actual internal policies, programs, and processes which you'd find within your various businesses. You know, if your workplace has more than 5 employees here in Nova Scotia under the Safety Act, then you're required to have an occupational health and safety policy, which is to be posted and updated yearly, and this will outline, you know, the commitment from the employer to maintain the health and safety of the employees in the workplace. Similarly, if your workplace has more than 20 employees, then you're required to have a health and safety program, which is a little bit more in depth, and that will outline aspects of training, participation with respect to joint occupational health and safety committees, but also, you know, accident investigation, inspection. So it'll sort of outline your internal health and safety management system. And then finally, every company will also have their own policies, and that can be anything from the discipline policy, the workplace impairment policy, your health and safety promotion policies, and these will sort of regulate the day-to-day conduct of your employees within the confines of your business. And last but not least are sort of job-specific policies and procedures. So on larger operations, if you have if the nature of your operation has a particular procedure that can be quite dangerous, having a procedure in place to sort of outline the steps, first of all, to sort of identify the potential risks in that procedure, and then identify the steps required to conduct that work safely. That will be put in place, and the employee will be trained, and they'll be ensured that they only ever operate that particular piece of equipment or do that process in accordance with the procedure. So when combining the Act, the regulations, the code, and the standards and various codes, the criminal aspect, the criminal code potential provision, as well as internal policies, programs, and processes, put together, all of these sort of constitute the controls in place to kind of protect your employees and to make sure that businesses are safe, because ultimately there is a direct correlation between the strength of the safety program, the minimization of risk, and the elimination of injuries, and the promotion of growth and the overall success and financial success of the business. So now that we've sort of we've reviewed the overall process or some of the legislation, there's two very important concepts around occupational health and safety that it's very important for us to go over, mainly so that it'll help better understand why all of these things exist, why this legislation exists, how they apply to you, but also give you a better understanding as to why it's set up in this particular way. So the two key concepts that we're going to review next are the internal responsibility system, which you'll often see and referred to as the IRS for short, and the aspect of due diligence. And both of these are key to every business, regardless of the size of the operation. So the next slide I'm going to play is a short video. This was a video created by our awareness and outreach team. I'm hoping that it will contain video sound. In the event that it does not, you will see closed captioning. And at the very end of this presentation, I will provide the links to all of these videos. They're available on YouTube. So if you are interested, you'd like to show them to your employees as part of an orientation, I will make sure that you have the links to access those as well. So this next short video talks about the internal responsibility system. It's about 2 minutes long, and it's designed to sort of explain this concept in a way that every workplace party can understand. It's designed to be simple, and it uses an example of a sports team. And I'll play it next, and hopefully you'll understand the analogy. But afterwards, we'll sort of discuss a little bit more.
We all have a responsibility to ensure workplaces are safe. Whether you're an employer, supervisor, or worker, we're all on the same team with different roles to ensure safe workplaces. So, what do you do if you see a health and safety issue or workplace hazard? Fix it if you can, report it if you can't, and always make sure safety is the top priority. Employers, you are like the team coach. And like all great coaches, you need a plan. Having a safety policy and program demonstrates that safety is a priority in your organization. Your plan provides the information that everyone needs to work safely at your place of business. You provide PPE, maintain equipment, machines, and materials. You also consult and cooperate with the organization's Joint Occupational Health and Safety Committee, as required. Supervisors, you're the leaders on the ground, the team captains. It's your role to ensure everyone understands why safety is important. You assign work, give direction, offer training, inspect and investigate concerns, correct hazards within your control, and report hazards that are beyond your control. You also don't allow work to continue if hazards exist or have been reported. Employees, you are the hands-on of the job, the players on each shift. You know best when it comes to seeing and mitigating hazards within your control. To support your team, your role is to report a hazard if there is something that makes you feel unsafe. If you're not sure, consult with your Joint Occupational Health and Safety Committee or a representative when you have questions, concerns, or insight. You have the best point of view on the field to identify safety issues. Safe workplaces are the most important outcome for everyone. Safety is everyone's business.
All right, so that's our brief video on the internal responsibility system, and there's a few key words that are placed in the video there, and I think the biggest one being that safety is everyone's business. So the next slide here, I'm sort of going to explain the internal responsibility system in a little bit more detail, because it's sort of the foundation for health and safety in most Commonwealth countries, but definitely here in Canada. So this concept is sort of grounds health and safety, regardless of whether your operations are in, excuse me, in British Columbia or here in Nova Scotia. Everything is sort of built on this notion. So, for a long time, people have assumed that the internal responsibility system is sort of comes out of Ontario, and there is some truth to that. That in 1976 there was a Ham Commission report out of Ontario, and this was sort of the result, unfortunately, of another mining disaster in Ontario. And as part of this commission report, they looked into sort of the business operations, and in the report they sort of broke down the organizational structure from the mining president all the way down to the actual employee, and next to each one of their organizational titles, they assigned a certain level of responsibility, which you'll see here. So the internal responsibility system, that was sort of first published in that context in that report, but it was something that was, existed previously, and it was also seen in some British academics, as also how other provinces had begun to structure their health and safety legislation. The whole idea around the internal responsibility system is that it's more based on accident theory. And what that means, accident theory, I have a definition here. An accident theory in health and safety context is the study of failures within a management system or human error, and allows safety professionals to better understand why accidents happen and how to design a management system to prevent it. So the whole idea behind here is that, how do we prevent and how do we eliminate and how do we reduce injuries in a workplace? And it was seen that, the best way of doing so is by seeing as a system and looking at an organization as a whole, and ensuring that each and every individual within that organization has a certain level of responsibility when it comes to health and safety. Not only do they have that responsibility, but they also have accountability. Looking overall in terms of, safety performance and who are the businesses that were having the least claims, the least injuries versus those that were sustaining injuries all the time, it was seen that, the best performers when it came to safety were those that, sort of applied these concepts across the board to everybody in their workplace, while ensuring that each individual also had that personal responsibility. Because once you're seeing yourself in that, then it was a way to sort of empower, but also to drive down risk across the organization. So, the next few points here in terms of, how do you break down the internal responsibility system? And I think I came across this recently, and I thought it was a very good way of explaining it. Internal, when you hear the internal aspect of it, there's two parts in terms of the internal responsibility system. Internally, it means that responsibility for health and safety is internal to the workplace. Yes, there's also the external responsibility system, which would sort of include, the government aspects of operations, and kind of coming in and sort of and looking at businesses to make sure they comply. But more importantly, it's internal to the workplace, because no two businesses are the same, and the people who are in the best position to understand their operations and to reduce risk are the business operators and workplace parties themselves. So empowering them and giving them that voice is key to the system. And the second part is that safety is internal to the work. And what do they mean by that? The other thing they'll say is that it's intrinsic to the work itself. So when you're doing your job, whether it is mopping the floor or whether it is operating the crane, health and safety it's a vital part of your work. You don't just do health and safety on Fridays and the Mondays to Thursday, you do it regularly. It's something that you should do every day as part of every time you do that work. So the idea is that it's internal to the task itself and to the operations itself. The responsibility aspect is sort of putting on personal duties on every workplace parties, ensuring that they see themselves reflected, much like the team concept itself. Whether you're the manager, whether you're the owner, or whether you're the employee on the ground, you should know that you have these rights and responsibilities. So if I know that I have a responsibility to sort of report report situations that are unsafe, such as in the Westray situation, I also need to have rights. And rights are sort of protected in the law, and these rights will sort of give me the confidence and security to know that I can speak up. And the three rights that I'm sure everybody's familiar with here in Nova Scotia, but again across all of Canada, are the right to know about hazards that could potentially harm you. So when you're onboarding a new employee, you have to make sure that they understand, all the risks in the workplace. As an employee, you have the right to refuse unsafe work, and there's a very clear process how to do that. But not only do you have that right, but you also have protections if you properly exercise that right. And there is a very clear process, and it starts with making sure that you voice your concern to your supervisor so that they're in a position to rectify that situation. And last but not least is the right to participate in health and safety decision making in your workplace. And that can be in the form of a safety representative, or if your business is big enough as a joint occupational health and safety committee, you have a right to participate in that. You have a right to ask questions. So understanding that it's not simply the prerogative of your employer or the responsibility of your supervisor. As an employee, I do have a duty and responsibility, not just to myself, but to my colleagues in the workplace, but also to my work in terms of reporting anything that could be unsafe, just so that they can address it immediately at that time. And finally, the last part of the internal responsibility system is this notion of a system. And it's a sum of its parts, and the system is made up of each individual in that workplace. They work together to further the intent of the system, which is to minimize risk and to eliminate injuries. So, it's not simply, I'm just going to sit here and come and do my 9 to 5. You still have that responsibility, and you should still understand that you are an important part of that system, and the system as a whole will fail if the various pieces and aspects to it don't do their role. And that's sort of in situations like that where there's poor communication, or there is, whether it's the employees are not aware about their rights and responsibilities to speak up, or in certain situations, if the manager or supervisor or owner is sort of is not doing what they're required, that's when a safety division would become involved to sort of help support this internal responsibility system, to get everybody back doing what they're required to do, and just provide some more support. So we talked about duties and responsibilities, and as we mentioned, the Act is more about the peoples and what the people in the workplace and what their rights and responsibilities are. So these are the sections of the Act. Section 13 will talk about what the employers are responsible to do. Most importantly is to ensure that their workplace is safe. To make sure they provide training, or when necessary, the personal protective equipment. To respond to situations of risk that's brought forward by employees. But similarly, employees also have rights and responsibilities, and part of that is to follow the procedures and the requirements of their business operations in which they work, to report unsafe conditions, to wear the PPE, to follow the rules. So it's not they still have that responsibility, as well as to speak up, both if they see something of concern in terms of if there's a piece of equipment or material, but also if they see one of their colleagues that perhaps is working unsafely. They also have that responsibility to speak up as well, ideally to bring it to their attention first and foremost. But if their conduct is at risk of harming themselves or others in the workplace, is also to report on that to the supervisor. So these rights are made very clear in the Act itself. So just a few points about statutory duties is that they're very personal. Too many people think it's just the employer that has that responsibility. They'll take care of health and safety, and I just come in here and I do my work and I get to go home. Well, the idea is that each and every one of us is a part of this. Yes, we each have our rights and our responsibilities in terms of doing that. This is not something that can be delegated to avoid liability. It's not something that you can just pass on to a supervisor or a manager and say, well, I wasn't aware. Yes, you can delegate work, but you can't. But this only creates duties in others. So you can, there's still that duty still passes. So if the employer says, well, I'm hiring my supervisor to make sure this operation is done, it's not to say that I don't have any responsibility. As an owner, you still do, but the supervisor has different responsibilities. You can't be contracted out. And again, unfortunately, I've been in situations where I've been asked by employees can I take more pay if I'm willing to not worry about wearing fall arrest and all the rest of it? And the answer is absolutely not. First of all, it's illegal, and second of all, it's not something you can contract out. This is a force of law. It applies to your employer and applies to you. The employer has the responsibility to make a when conducting business at height, to make sure that their employees have the necessary fall arrest protection, and you as the employee have that requirement to conduct your work in accordance with those requirements. So you cannot contract out of it regardless of what the terms of that contract are. Again, these are broad and flexible, but they are applied in any given situation. So the business operations in a mining might be very different than those in a retail situation, and the level of accountability and responsibility may differ, but they still apply regardless of the situation. And finally, and this is kind of leads us to our next slide, which is due diligence is a defense to a charge that one has breached their duty. So if it's in a situation where an accident, a serious accident resulting in loss of property, a loss of life, or amputation, or something that would require sort of investigation, they will look at, when I say they, the safety officers will look at sort of everybody's accountability and responsibility and determine have they done what is necessary. So this next slide will talk a little bit about due diligence, and this is sort of in the context of occupational health and safety law. In legal terms, there's only one true defense to a charge out of occupational health and safety. A violation of, or I should say a charge of under the Safety Act is what we call a strict liability offense, which means that it's a situation where this is the standard or this is the regulation. Have you or have you not done that? At the time of the incident, was this person or were they not wearing their safety gear? Did you or did you not have that policy in place? The fact that you intended to or you wanted to, or that's sort of, it's irrelevant. Unfortunately, it's very black and white, but that's what strict liability offenses play into, as opposed to sort of a criminal code offense in which you have to demonstrate not only the actus reus, which is the fact that they actually conducted the action, but also mens rea, where they had the intention to commit the act. It doesn't matter if there was intention whether or not to harm their employee. The fact is they didn't. The necessary equipment was not in place, and that's enough to bring the charges. So the only defense as an organization, whether it's as a company, as an owner, or a supervisor, or employer, is due diligence. And what is due diligence? It's sort of once the burden of proof shifts, so if they're laying charges, they say the employer, this particular person failed to comply with this so that section of the regulation. So the judge or the person will ask in that context whether, given in that particular situation, did the person being charged do everything that they could that was reasonable in the circumstances to eliminate and protect or avoid that person from experiencing harm or damage to the property. So did you do everything in your ability at that time to minimize that harm? And this is a question. It's due diligence is activity based, and it's something that you have to be able to show by your actions that you did that before the event occurred. And too often we'll see a horrible thing happens, and businesses will sort of they'll it's very reactive, where we've invested all this money and we've hired safety professionals, we've bought new equipment, and these are all wonderful things, but unfortunately that doesn't show due diligence. That's kind of that's an after effect. That's a result of the bad thing happening. So what have you done prior to the incident to sort of eliminate or reduce that, or reduce the possibility of that happening? And what the courts will often look at is sort of your documentation. Documentation is extremely important because it's sort of the one physical aspect that you can demonstrate that what you're saying you did, you actually conducted. So documentation, whether it's sort of orientation, signing off to show that your employees actually understood that they received this training, that you went through the different rights and responsibilities, that you walked around the workplace with them, that you provided them with a PPE, whatever it is that you need to demonstrate that you complied with, having that in writing is often key. And they'll look into sort of your orientation and training. Is this, if the nature of the work was dangerous, they receive the appropriate training for it. So that's due diligence. This last part, I realize we're near the end of our session, so I'm just going to go very quickly through this last part, which is some of the free resources and training available to you as as the public here in Nova Scotia. The first one is, for small businesses, we want to make you aware of our publications and materials. So we have what you call a safety manual for business. This was created by the Spring Garden Retail Association, and it provides a lot of amazing policies for small businesses. I have all the QR codes here, and somebody asked the question whether this slide will be made available, and it will be, so you will have access to all of this. The small business toolkit, again, it's, it could, based on the size of your company, you have different requirements around the policies and programs, so we can talk about how to build that up. And, again, workplace first aid guide will sort of outline what your requirements are. The next thing I want to sort of showcase here are some of our multilingual resources. More and more we're seeing a lot of diversity in language and in culture in various workplaces here in Nova Scotia. So it's important that, these be made accessible for you as a business owner, but more importantly, at a certain level, to your employees as well. So here we have, different resources. We have what we call our health and safety. It's kind of this is sort of our contact cards. We'll have our fridge magnets. This will sort of outline kind of how to contact the division. And we have various offerings. This QR code will take you to the website, which will provide all of the various language offerings available. Next, we have some safety videos. You saw the first one here in the internal responsibility system here. These are some of the links to it. We've also recently created a video around what to expect when an occupational health and safety officer comes to your workplace, whether it's as a result of a call or, if there was a complaint, what to expect, this kinds of situation that what some of the information they'll be asking for, and more importantly, how they'll work with you to achieve compliance. So that's a great video for small businesses to check out. Last, I'm just going to show a very short video. Here's about 30 seconds. This is our new app, which is called Nova Safe. If you haven't already, I'm going to definitely urge you to take a look.
When you're stepping up safely for your job, use the Nova Safe app. Safety information made simple. A message from the Government of Nova Scotia.
So if you haven't come across this ad already, it was part of a big marketing push for this new app that we developed called Nova Safe. Again, you have the QR code, but this will all be made available to you. If you haven't accessed it already, I definitely urge you to get the shortcut on your mobile device. It's a mobile-friendly website. We currently have 32 topics on occupational health and safety. It's available from your cell phone, laptop, or desktop. The whole idea was to make health and safety available for individuals and businesses across Nova Scotia. It's currently available in both English and French. And on the next slide, you'll see it. So this is sort of a screenshot of what it would look like. We have, like I said, we have 32 different topics ranging anywhere from health and safety, but also covers technical safety requirements. So we're talking about, training requirements for boilers and pressure vessels, elevators, things like that. But here's a classic example. It's the main part, the summary part will be outlined in clear language. So it's designed to be easily understood. You'll have different reference sections and definition parts, but you'll also have tabs to the various legislation, so you can actually read what the law says around that particular topic. And last but not least is you'll see resources. So there's a lot of additional resources that can also help support if you're looking for more information. Finally, for small businesses, we have what you call the Occupational Health and Safety Education Trust Fund. So this is something that you'd have to apply for. But if you or similar businesses, if you have a similar needs, whether it's sort of receiving, we receive a lot of employees from this particular demographic. We'd like to get some financial support to help translation in that material, or we'd like to develop a policy around this for our business. You can make application for some funding to support those particular endeavors. And the next few slides here is sort of how can we get free safety resources and courses, whether it's for yourself as a business operator or for your employees. So hopefully all of you are familiar with these, but in the event that you're not, the three main areas that you can access this are through CCOH&S, which is the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety. They kind of cover all of Canada. They're for a not-for-profit resource, which sort of creates health and safety information. Now, we, as the Government of Nova Scotia, have entered a license agreement with CCOH&S in which we can offer 5 courses for year for free. So some of these courses range anywhere from $10 to $50, I believe, through CCOH&S. But if you log on directly through our website, which I'll show you in the next slide, you're able to access them for free. And last but not least, you're also available or able to access WMIS skills training through Skills Online for free. So CCOHS, like I mentioned, a lot of the courses, they have approximately 100 online courses, but some, you have to pay for. However, if you go through our website, so if you just go through, this is our website here, and this will be our main site, you'll come across, you'll see over this section here, through training, you'll come across this site here. If you access CCOHS through Nova Scotia, you'll be able to access 5 courses per year for free. So that can have some significant savings. And again, it's per individual. So any member of your workplace can access them as well. This here is a list of sort of the 10 most accessed courses through us, the ones that employers or employees have found to be most valuable. Have orientation to health and safety, fire safety, hazards and risks. Again, I will make this available so you can take a look at what might be of most value to you. But this here is a listing of those that are the most frequently accessed and used. And I should also mention that at the end of these courses, you can get a certificate of completion. So whether it's for your internal safety system, just to kind of keep a track of what training your employees have received, that they're familiar with these particular risks, or the employee themselves, whether it's for applying for other positions or just to sort of have in their own portfolio, they can print that off just to show that they've sort of taken courses along that. Last but not least, I'd like to I definitely encourage you all, if you haven't already, to subscribe to the Safety Branches contact list. That's the QR code there, but you can access it either through NovaSafe. When you go to the website, you'll see the sign up. And we push out safety bulletins, safety notices, safety alerts, and directives. And this sort of keeps you in the loop in terms of potential hazards or developments within the safety industry. But we also publish our newsletter called The Signal, which we release quarterly. And this will include all updates, but also stay tuned for future webinars that we'll also be conducting as well. So those will be made available there. So, like I said, if you haven't subscribed already, this is a great way to get immediate information on some of our resources. Last 2 slides I have here is this is just kind of how to contact the department. 1-800-9-LABOR is our number. You can also send an email. Our phone lines are operated 24 hours, 7 days a week. So, and the calls are directed based on emergency. If there's a fire and explosion, then that gets immediate attention. And last but not least, here's a list of our various websites and social media presences. So if you were looking for more information, all of this information, all of that can be accessed here. So this is my last slide here. That brings me to the end of my presentation. I'm sorry for going a little bit over, Will, but I'll turn it over if there's any questions, or if anybody would like any questions or follow-up anybody would like to discuss.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Sterling. This is very informative. Because we're running out of time, and Sterling already shared email. If you have more questions, feel free to send him email. If you didn't screenshot the email, if Sterling is okay, just contact us and we can share with the information. So thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. We want to thank you, our speaker Sterling, again for the amazing webinar. It was very informative and we learned so much. I also want to let everyone know October is Small Business Month, and the Chamber is hosting Small Business Month, Small Business Big Growth Luncheon, Masterclass, and Social on October 19th. And we are also hosting very exciting fall dinner on November 8th with art community with Symphony Nova Scotia, Neptune Theater, Art Gallery, and you can grab your tickets on our website. So this webinar was recorded and will be available to all attendees shortly on YouTube. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for coming in, and thank you, Sterling, again, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.